On October 14, 1943, at an altitude of 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany, Captain Don Blakesley, commander of the 4th Fighter Group, steadied his P-47 Thunderbolt and scanned the distant horizon. Below, 316 B-17 flying fortresses advanced toward their target, the ball-bearing factories that kept the German war machine moving. Surrounding them, like wolves circling an exhausted herd, more than 300 Luftwaffe fighters attacked relentlessly. Blakesley checked his fuel gauge. It showed only 20 minutes remaining before he would have to turn back 20 minutes of protection for bombers that still needed nearly 3 hours to return to England. The arithmetic was unforgiving. The P-47 Thunderbolt, America's main fighter, had the range of a short-distance racer. It could escort bombers about 250 miles into Germany, but no farther. Once the fighters turned for home, the bombers continued on alone, exposed to enemy aircraft. That day's mission would end with 60 B-17s destroyed and 600 American airmen lost. As Blakesley finally ordered his group to turn back, leaving the bombers behind to face another 200 enemy fighters, he sent a message that would echo through 8th Air Force headquarters. "We need a fighter that can go all the way to Berlin and back. Until we get one, we're sending these bomber boys to die." What Captain Blakesley did not realize was that such a fighter already existed, not in a secret laboratory or hidden government project, but in a quiet hangar at Wright Field, Ohio. It was a plane the Army Air Forces had rejected as unsuitable, one that official reports had labeled inferior to current American fighters. According to every rule of bureaucracy, it should have been scrapped and forgotten. But 5 months earlier, at a small Rolls-Royce facility in England, a mechanic named Ronald Harker had made a decision that defied regulations. Without authorization, he test flew an American-built aircraft, saw something others had missed, and wrote a report that challenged official evaluations. His act went against orders and proper channels, and his suggestions were technically illegal because he had no right to recommend changes to a foreign Air Force's design. Yet Harker understood something few had grasped. The P-51 Mustang, dismissed as a low-altitude fighter with limited potential, could become the finest air superiority plane of World War II if given the right engine. He proposed replacing its American-built Allison engine with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin. That one modification would reshape aviation history. The story of the overlooked fighter began in 1941, 2 years before the Schweinfurt raid. North American aviation had received an urgent request from the British Purchasing Commission. At that time, Britain stood almost alone against Nazi Germany. Its air force, though brave and skilled, was stretched thin. The Supermarine Spitfire was excellent, but could not be produced fast enough. The Hawker Hurricane, once the pride of the Royal Air Force, was aging and outmatched. Britain needed a new fighter fast, and turned to American industry for help. The British first asked North American Aviation to build the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk under license. North American's answer was bold, almost reckless. James Kindleberger, known as Dutch, the president of North American Aviation, told the British they could design and build a better fighter from the ground up in the same time it would take to set up licensed P-40 production. The British were skeptical, but desperate. Therefore, they gave North American 120 days to deliver a prototype. What came from North American's design team, led by Chief Engineer Edgar Schmuud, was the NA-73, which the British would later call the Mustang. The prototype was completed and flew in a remarkably short time, meeting the challenge with breathing room to spare. Wikipedia +1. The Mustang's design was revolutionary in several technical details. It used a laminar flow wing developed with input from NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which reduced drag and improved speed. The radiator was placed beneath and behind the pilot so that the heated air exiting the cooling system produced some thrust through what engineers call the Meredith effect, therefore reducing net drag. The fuselage shape was produced from careful calculations rather than crude visual rules, and the manufacturing approach borrowed automotive techniques so the airframe could be produced quickly. The prototype first flew on October 26, 1940, only days ahead of the 120-day target. Wikipedia Pso. In early tests, the Mustang was fast at low altitude, reaching roughly 380 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, and pilots praised its handling. Its internal fuel capacity plus the option for external drop tanks gave it a range that outmatched other single-engine fighters of the time. Therefore, the British ordered Mustangs for service as the Mustang Mark I. But the airplane had a fatal limitation that would relegate it to secondary roles unless fixed. The Allison V1710 engine fitted to early Mustangs gave good power at low and medium altitudes, but could not maintain power above about 15,000 feet because it used a single-stage, single-speed supercharger. At combat altitudes around 25,000 feet, the Mustang's speed and climb suffered badly, leaving it vulnerable to German fighters operating higher. Wikipedia. The Royal Air Force recognized the Allison-powered Mustang's ceiling problem and therefore shifted the type into low-altitude tactical reconnaissance and ground attack duties where its strengths were most useful. The United States Army Air Forces reached much the same conclusion after testing. They praised the Mustang's low-altitude performance and range, but judged it unsuitable for high-altitude escort and interceptor missions against modern European fighters operating above 25,000 feet. Because of that official assessment, the aircraft faced the prospect of limited procurement unless its high-altitude performance could be corrected. By mid-1942, the Mustang seemed destined to become only a minor footnote in aviation history. It was a promising design limited by poor engine performance, suitable for secondary missions, but unable to meet the urgent wartime need for long-range escort fighters. North American aviation continued production for both British and a few American orders, but its future appeared tied more to other designs, such as the B-25 Mitchell bomber. Then, on April 30, 1943, a single decision by Ronald Harker changed the course of aviation history. Ronald Harker was not a combat pilot. He was a 30-year-old test pilot and engine specialist employed by Rolls-Royce at its Hucknall facility in England. His role was to test engines in different aircraft and provide technical assessments to improve performance. He had no authority to evaluate foreign fighters, make recommendations about their use, or suggest design modifications to another nation's aircraft. On April 30th, Harker visited Royal Air Force Duxford to observe the Mustang Mark I in its tactical reconnaissance role. During his visit, the squadron commander remarked casually that the Mustang was excellent below 15,000 feet, but useless above. He invited Harker to take the aircraft for a flight, likely expecting him to confirm that known limitation. Yet during what should have been a routine familiarization flight, Harker noticed something extraordinary. The airframe was outstanding, the aerodynamics were refined, and the handling was smooth. Everything felt right except the power plant. Because Harker was an expert on engines, he instantly understood what this meant. Harker knew the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine better than anyone. It powered the Spitfire, Hurricane, Mosquito, and Lancaster Britain's most effective aircraft of the war. The Merlin had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that kept strong power even beyond 30,000 feet, while the Allison engine struggled to breathe above 25,000 feet. The Merlin produced about 1,420 horsepower at that altitude, compared to the Allison's roughly 1,000. As Harker returned the Mustang to Duxford, an idea began to take shape. He thought about combining the Mustang's remarkable airframe with the Merlin's high-altitude performance. Such a merger could create a fighter that possessed both long-range and superior power at altitude. Therefore, after landing, Harker took an extraordinary step. Without authorization from Rolls-Royce management, without approval from the Royal Air Force, and without permission from American authorities, he wrote a detailed report recommending that the Mustang be fitted with the Rolls-Royce Merlin. His report, dated May 3, 1943, read, "The Mustang airframe is superior to any fighter currently in production. Its only limitation is the Allison engine's altitude performance. Installation of the Merlin engine would create an aircraft combining the Mustang's range and handling with the Merlin's high-altitude power." He concluded that such a combination would outperform any fighter currently in service and urged immediate testing. The report reached Air Vice Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, who instantly recognized its potential. Freeman had the authority to act, but he faced a diplomatic challenge. The Americans had already rejected the Mustang for high-altitude roles, and suggesting they had been mistaken risked offending an ally. Even so, Freeman decided that winning the war was more important than politics. He forwarded Harker's report to the Ministry of Aircraft Production with a handwritten note, "This may be the most important recommendation to cross my desk this year. We should pursue it regardless of diplomatic complications." What neither Harker nor Freeman realized was that across the Atlantic, the Packard Motor Company, Rolls-Royce's American licensee, had already been exploring the same idea. At Wright Field, a small group of engineers had quietly supported the concept of combining the Mustang airframe with the Merlin engine for months. But their proposals had repeatedly been blocked by layers of military bureaucracy. The idea itself was not entirely new. Several engineers had mentioned it informally, yet official channels rejected it for reasons that, while logical on paper, collectively hindered innovation. First, the Allison engine was American-made, whereas the Merlin was British. National pride and industrial policy favored using American engines in American aircraft. Second, the Merlin was in short supply, as British factories were already stretched, meeting the demands of Spitfire and Lancaster production. Diverting those engines to American fighters risked reducing output of essential British planes. Third, fitting a different engine required extensive redesign, which meant additional time, money, and engineering effort. Why modify an aircraft that had already been judged inadequate when proven fighters were in service? And finally, the procurement bureaucracy had already invested heavily in other aircraft, such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning. To question that commitment would mean admitting earlier strategic misjudgments, something bureaucracies rarely do willingly. By the spring of 1943, however, the situation had become dire. The 8th Air Force was losing bombers at a rate that could not be sustained during deep raids into Germany. The P-47 was a strong fighter, but lacked the range needed for long missions. The P-38 had sufficient range, but its complex twin-engine design struggled in Europe's cold, damp climate, often grounding aircraft with mechanical issues. The Allies urgently needed a true long-range escort fighter, and Harker's report offered a possible answer. Air Vice Marshal Freeman contacted the United States Army Air Forces through formal channels to suggest testing a Merlin-powered Mustang. The American response was cool. A memo from Wright Field, dated May 22, noted, "The RAF's suggestion regarding Merlin installation in the P-51 is acknowledged. However, the P-47 and P-38 are already designated for escort duties. Altering a design previously deemed unsuitable for high-altitude work appears inefficient." Yet Freeman was determined. Rolls-Royce had already begun the modification on its own, without waiting for approval. At Hucknall, Rolls-Royce engineers removed the Allison engine from Mustang Mark Warrant serial number AL975 and began fitting it with a Merlin 61. Technically, this action violated international agreements. The Mustang had been supplied to Britain under the Lend-Lease program, meaning it remained the property of the United States. Altering it without permission from either the manufacturer or the American government broke every procedural rule. Still, with Freeman's silent consent, Rolls-Royce moved forward. The conversion proved challenging. The Merlin engine was larger than the Allison, forcing changes to the engine mounts, the nose cowling, and the cooling system. The propeller also had to be replaced to handle the Merlin's higher power output, and the fuel delivery system needed redesigning. After 4 months of meticulous work, the modified aircraft, now designated the Mustang Mark X, was ready for flight. On October 13, 1943, Ronald Harker climbed into the cockpit for its first test flight. As the Mustang ascended through the clouds and reached 25,000 feet, he pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft surged with a power and smoothness that had been missing before. The Mustang had found its perfect match. The results surpassed even Harker's most confident expectations. At an altitude of 25,000 feet, the Merlin-powered Mustang achieved a top speed of 430 miles per hour, about 70 miles per hour faster than the Allison engine version at the same height. The rate of climb was remarkable, and its handling remained smooth and responsive. Most importantly, the aircraft's range, already excellent with the Allison engine, did not suffer. The Merlin consumed fuel at nearly the same rate as the Allison, meaning the Mustang's extraordinary endurance now extended to high-altitude operations as well. In his flight test report dated October 15, 1943, Harker wrote, "The Merlin Mustang is the finest fighter aircraft I have ever flown at any altitude. Performance exceeds the Spitfire, Mark 9 above 20,000 feet, while maintaining a range advantage of over 200%. This aircraft should be put into production immediately." Within days, Royal Air Force pilots were flying the Merlin Mustang and confirming Harker's findings. Squadron leader Michael Robinson, a seasoned combat pilot credited with 12 enemy aircraft destroyed, recorded his impressions in his report. "I have flown Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Thunderbolts in combat," he wrote. The Merlin Mustang is superior to all of them above 15,000 feet, and its equal below. Most importantly, its range is nearly 3 times that of the Spitfire. This is the bomber escort fighter we have been waiting for. Before we continue with how this unauthorized experiment reshaped the air war over Europe, if you find this story of innovation and quiet defiance fascinating, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. We share detailed and carefully researched accounts of military history, revealing the people and ideas behind the machines that changed the world. Your support allows us to keep producing these in-depth documentaries. Now, let's see what happened when the Americans finally recognized what one mechanic's unapproved test flight had already proven. The British test results could not be ignored. By November 1943, reports from the Merlin Mustang had reached senior American commanders, who quickly understood their importance. General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the United States Army Air Forces, reviewed the data showing performance numbers beyond any American aircraft in service. The Merlin Mustang could fly more than 2,000 miles with external fuel tanks, reach speeds of 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, and climb to a service ceiling of 41,000 feet. These were not theoretical claims, but verified test results from an operational aircraft. General Arnold acted without hesitation. On November 8th, he sent an order to North American aviation convert 2 P-51s to the Merlin configuration immediately. Conduct full performance testing and report results directly to my office. But by that time, North American's engineers were already moving in the same direction. While Rolls-Royce was completing its experimental conversions in England, North American had begun collaborating with the Packard Motor Company, which was manufacturing Merlin engines in the United States under license. Edgar Schmued, the Mustang's chief designer, had long believed that the Allison engine was a temporary compromise, not the heart of the aircraft's true potential. He had designed the Mustang with enough internal space to allow for future engine upgrades. Knowing that technological progress might require changes, so when Packard Motor Company approached North American in the summer of 1943 with samples of their newly built Merlin engines, Chief Engineer Edgar Schmued acted immediately. The Packard Merlin U-1650, produced under licenses from Rolls-Royce, was practically identical to its British counterpart, but made to American manufacturing standards using American tools, because Packard was already producing thousands of these engines for Britain. Using them in American aircraft solved the earlier supply concern that had blocked the conversion. North American completed 2 prototype conversions, designated NA-102 and NA-103 in November 1943. Company test pilot Robert Chilton took the first American-built Merlin Mustang into the air on November 30th. His test report echoed what the British had already discovered. The aircraft performed beautifully at every altitude and outmatched every American fighter currently in service or under development. When Wright Field engineers received the prototypes in early December for official testing, the same team that had once dismissed the Mustang now faced data that left no room for argument. At 25,000 feet, the Merlin Mustang was 40 miles per hour faster than the P-47 Thunderbolt and 55 miles per hour faster than the P-38 Lightning. It could climb faster than either aircraft at any altitude above 15,000 feet. Even more remarkable was its range. Before using drop tanks, the Mustang could fly 850 miles on internal fuel compared to the P-47's 475 and the P-38's 525. For long-range escort missions, the critical measure was combat radius, the distance a fighter could fly to a target, engage in combat, and return safely. The P-47 could reach about 250 miles into Germany, enough to escort bombers to the Ruhr Valley, but not to Berlin. The P-38 could extend that to roughly 300 miles. The Merlin Mustang, officially designated the P-51B, could reach 650 miles using internal fuel alone. When equipped with 2 75-gallon drop tanks, its combat radius extended to 800 miles. Berlin was about 550 miles from England. The P-51B could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, with fuel remaining for combat operations. General Henry Hap Arnold recognized what these numbers meant. On December 20th, 1943, he ordered immediate, full-scale production of the new fighter. Every available Mustang airframe would be fitted with the Merlin engine. Production of Allison-powered models would stop, and factory output would be increased rapidly. North American's plant in Inglewood, California, was tasked with building the P-51B, while a new facility in Dallas, Texas, would produce an identical version called the P-51C. By the spring of 1944, production reached more than 400 aircraft per month. The first P-51B Mustangs arrived in England in December 1943, assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, known as the Pioneer Mustang Group. At first, pilots transferring from the heavy P-47 Thunderbolt were doubtful. The Mustang appeared small and light in comparison. It had a single engine instead of 2, and its 4 .50 caliber machine guns seemed modest next to the Thunderbolt's 8. But when the group flew its first combat mission on December 5, 1943, escorting bombers to Amiens, France, opinions changed immediately. The new Mustangs climbed past 25,000 feet, with ease so quickly that they were forced to throttle back to stay with the bombers they were meant to protect. They flew at cruising speeds that allowed them to sweep back and forth above the bomber formations without draining their fuel reserves. When German fighters appeared, the Mustangs dove toward them with a speed and force the Luftwaffe had never encountered from an American aircraft. Lieutenant Charles Gumm, on his first Mustang mission, spotted two Focke-Wulf 190s moving in to strike the bombers. From 28,000 feet, he dove at over 500 miles per hour. The German pilots, assuming the attacker was a P-47 Thunderbolt, expected him to make a single high-speed pass and climb away. But Gumm stayed on them through every turn and climb. Using the Mustang's agility to stay locked on target, he destroyed both enemy fighters, then climbed back to bomber altitude with plenty of fuel remaining. In his combat report, Gumm wrote, "The P-51 does everything the P-47 does, plus it stays with the bombers all the way home. This changes everything." His statement proved prophetic. By January 1944, several fighter groups began converting to the Mustang. The 357th Fighter Group received their aircraft in February, followed by the 4th Fighter Group in March under the command of Don Blakesley, the same man who had once demanded a fighter that could reach Berlin. Each new unit came to the same realization: the Mustang was not just good at certain things, it was superior in nearly every aspect of combat performance. The numbers supported what pilots already knew. During January and February 1944, P-51 units achieved an extraordinary 11-to-1 kill ratio against German fighters. The P-47, which had been considered outstanding, averaged 7-to-1, while the P-38 managed 5-to-1. The Mustang's combination of speed, range, and maneuverability was unmatched. Luftwaffe pilots who had learned to counter previous American fighters now faced a completely different challenge. Major Günther Röhl, a veteran German ace with more than 200 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, encountered the new American fighter in March 1944. In his after-action account, Röhl admitted, "The new American fighter is superior to our aircraft in almost every area. It is faster, climbs better, has greater range, and handles superbly. Our only advantages are our cannon armament and experience. Our 20mm and 30mm guns are more destructive than their 50 calibers, and our pilots have far more combat hours. But these advantages are disappearing as their training improves, and our experienced men are lost faster than they can be replaced." The widespread arrival of the P-51 Mustang changed the course of the air war over Europe. Before its introduction, daylight bombing missions deep into German territory were acts of courage and high risk. Losses of 5 to 10% per mission were common, which meant that most bomber crews faced death or capture before completing their required 25 missions. Such losses threatened to end the American daylight bombing campaign altogether. But once the Mustangs began escorting bombers all the way to and from their targets, the results were dramatic. During the first daylight raids on Berlin in March 1944, losses fell below 4%, even against the Luftwaffe's most elite units. The presence of Mustangs on every leg of the mission prevented the large, coordinated attacks that had previously overwhelmed unescorted formations. For the first time, Allied bombers could strike at the heart of Germany's industrial and military infrastructure with confidence that they would return home. The Mustang had not just extended the reach of the 8th Air Force, it had changed the very nature of the air war in Europe. But the Mustang's influence reached far beyond escorting bombers. General James Doolittle, commander of the 8th Air Force, issued a directive in January 1944 that completely reshaped air combat strategy. Until that point, American fighters had been ordered to stay close to the bomber formations, acting primarily as defensive escorts to fend off German attacks. Doolittle's new order changed everything. Destroy the German Air Force, wherever you find it, in the air or on the ground. The Mustang's long range made that bold new strategy possible. Fighter groups could now fly far ahead of the bombers, engaging German fighters before they could form up for coordinated attacks. They could break formation to pursue enemy aircraft with confidence, knowing they had the fuel to return home. Increasingly, they were also striking German airfields directly, destroying enemy aircraft before they could even take off. The German response reflected growing alarm. Luftwaffe directives from the spring of 1944 revealed just how deeply the Mustang had altered the balance of power. A tactical order issued on March 28 stated, "American fighters with very long range, identified as P-51 Mustang, are now accompanying bomber formations for the entire duration of their missions. These fighters are superior to our BF-109G and FW-190A models in performance above 6,000 meters. Pilots are instructed to avoid prolonged combat with P-51s whenever possible. Attack bombers quickly, then disengage before escorts can respond." But avoiding the Mustangs was far easier said than done. The German fighters had only a slight advantage in dive speed, and even that edge was small. In climbing, turning, and accelerating, the Mustang proved equal or better in every respect. German pilots soon realized that to reach the bombers, they had to fight their way through the Mustangs, and those battles rarely ended well. The statistics from that period told the story with absolute clarity. In March 1944, the 8th Air Force lost 1 bombers. In April, that number dropped to 70. In May, it fell again to 61. By June, only 42 bombers were lost. These steady declines matched the growing presence of Mustang-equipped fighter groups. As more units transitioned to the P-51, bomber losses decreased, and American fighter victories climbed sharply. The Luftwaffe was being defeated in a war of attrition it could no longer sustain. American industry was producing fighters faster than Germany could replace its losses. The United States was training new pilots in greater numbers than Germany could hope to match. And those pilots were gaining valuable experience in every mission. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe's veteran aces were being killed or captured, and the new German recruits entering combat lacked the training and experience of their predecessors. By the time of the D-Day invasion in June 1944, Allied air superiority was nearly absolute. German fighters were almost entirely absent from the skies above Normandy. On June 6th alone, the Luftwaffe managed just 319 sorties, while Allied aircraft flew more than 14,000. High above the beaches, Mustangs patrolled constantly, ensuring that German aircraft could not gather in any meaningful strength. By late summer 1944, Germany's dayfighter force was effectively broken. Though it still existed and occasionally scored tactical successes, it was no longer a strategic threat. The Luftwaffe could not stop the bombing of German cities, could not protect ground forces retreating before the Allied advance, and could not rebuild its strength fast enough to matter. The Mustang, once dismissed by American procurement officers as unsuitable, had become the very weapon that secured air supremacy over Europe and helped turn the tide of World War II. The P-51 Mustang quickly became the aircraft of choice for America's top fighter pilots. Major George Preddy achieved 83 aerial victories, making him the leading Mustang ace. Major John Meyer scored 24 kills while flying P-51s. Colonel Francis Gabreski, already an ace from his time in the P-47 Thunderbolt, added 5 more victories in Mustangs. Captain Chuck Yeager, who would later become world famous for breaking the sound barrier, earned 11. 5 victories in the Mustang, including an astonishing 5 kills in a single day on October 12, 1944. Pilots adored the aircraft, not just for its numbers, but for how it felt to fly. The cockpit offered exceptional visibility, with its clear bubble canopy providing a full 360-degree view. The controls were light and precise, making the aircraft both steady for aiming and agile in combat. It was forgiving too, able to recover from mistakes that might have proved fatal in less stable fighters. Major George Preddy. In an interview just weeks before his death in December 1944, summed up what pilots loved most about the Mustang. "It does everything well. It's fast, climbs well, turns tight, and has range for hours. But what makes it special is how it combines all these qualities. Other fighters might match it in one area, but the Mustang is competitive in every area. You can't trap a Mustang pilot if he's competent. He can always pull away from a fight, regain altitude, and come back with the advantage. That versatility is what makes it deadly." Another quality that set the Mustang apart was its reliability, a factor often overlooked when comparing performance on paper. The Packard-built Merlin engine was tough, easy to maintain, and capable of running under extreme conditions. The airframe itself was sturdy, often bringing pilots home with battle damage that would have doomed other aircraft. Systems were designed with redundancy, so that a single malfunction rarely caused a crash. Captain Donald Lopez, who flew 70 missions in Mustangs, recalled returning from one sortie with 67 flak holes in his aircraft, including damage to one aileron and the rudder. The plane flew like it was angry, but it flew. He said, "Any other fighter would have been uncontrollable with that kind of damage. The Mustang just shrugged it off and brought me home." If you've enjoyed this exploration of how an unauthorized innovation led to the creation of the fighter that turned the air war in Europe, please subscribe to our channel and share this video. We're dedicated to delivering in-depth, well-researched military history that reveals not only the machines, but also the people and decisions that shaped the course of war. Hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Now, let's examine the final stage of the Mustang's evolution and its ultimate legacy. The P-51B and P-51C models, introduced in early 1944, were already remarkable, but North American aviation continued to refine the design. The most important advancement came with the P-51D, which entered production in March 1944. This version introduced a bubble canopy that replaced the older framed design, dramatically improving pilot visibility. Armament was increased from 4 to 6, 50-caliber machine guns, and a new gun sight improved targeting accuracy. Aerodynamic refinements pushed its top speed to 447 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. The P-51D became the definitive Mustang model with 9,823 built. By the fall of 1944, it had equipped most fighter groups in the 8th and 9th Air Forces and dominated the skies over Europe through the final months of the war. The final major version of the Mustang, the P-51H, represented the culmination of lessons learned from years of combat. Engineers reduced the aircraft's weight by using thinner wing skins and a lighter internal structure, improving both speed and maneuverability. The engine was upgraded to the Packard Merlin V1650-9, capable of producing 1,900 horsepower with water injection. This made the P-51H the fastest production Mustang ever built, reaching speeds of up to 487 miles per hour. Yet, despite its remarkable performance, the H model arrived too late to influence the outcome of the war. Production began in February 1945, and only 555 units were completed before the conflict ended. Few, if any, saw combat. The P-51D remained the standard Mustang throughout the closing months of the war and continued in frontline service for years afterward. Its performance remained exceptional. In skilled hands, the P-51D could even defeat the German Me-262 jet fighter under certain conditions. While the Me-262 was faster in level flight and armed with powerful cannons, it was highly vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Mustang pilots learned to exploit this weakness, patrolling near German airfields and striking the jets as they climbed or descended. The Mustang's superior agility and endurance meant that even the jet's speed advantage could be neutralized by tactical discipline and timing. Production numbers reflected the Mustang's enormous importance. A total of 15,575 aircraft were built across all variants, with roughly 8,000 of those being the P-51D model. At its peak in March 1945, factories were producing 550 Mustangs each month. For perspective, total P-47 Thunderbolt production reached 15,683, while the P-38 Lightning totaled 10,037. Despite entering large-scale production 2 years later than the Thunderbolt, the Mustang nearly matched it in overall numbers, a testament to how quickly it became indispensable. The combat record of the P-51 was equally remarkable. Mustang squadrons claimed 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, and another 4,000 destroyed on the ground during strafing missions. That combined total of nearly 9,000 made the Mustang the most successful American fighter of the war in terms of enemy aircraft destroyed. Loss statistics also told an important story. Of the 15,575 Mustangs built, about 2,520 were lost in combat, a loss rate of 16.2%. By comparison, the P-47 Thunderbolt lost 3,577 of 15,683 produced, a 22.9% loss rate, and the P-38 Lightning lost 1,758 of 10,037 or 17.5%. The Mustang's lower loss rate reflected not only its performance advantages, but also the declining strength of the German Air Force as the war neared its end. It also showed how durable and reliable the aircraft was able to absorb damage and still bring its pilots home safely. The Mustang's story did not end in 1945. It continued to serve with distinction during the Korean War, where it excelled in ground attack missions. Air forces around the world operated Mustangs through the 1950s and into the 1960s, with some nations keeping them in service well into the 1980s for training and patrol duties. Today, more than 150 Mustangs remain airworthy, captivating audiences at air shows and serving as flying tributes to an era of engineering brilliance. Yet the Mustang's true legacy reaches beyond its speed or combat record. It stands as a symbol of international collaboration, combining American design with British engine technology to create one of history's most effective fighters. It also embodies the importance of innovation and creative risk-taking in the face of bureaucracy. What began as a rejected aircraft ultimately became the machine that secured air superiority over Europe and helped win the air war of World War II. Ronald Harker's unauthorized test flight in April 1943 broke nearly every rule of military protocol. His recommendation contradicted official evaluations, and his decision to act without approval could easily have ended his career had his superiors chosen to enforce the regulations. Yet, his technical insight and his willingness to question accepted thinking led to the creation of the fighter that would secure air superiority over Europe. The story carries lessons far beyond aviation history. It reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected places, that bureaucratic rejection does not always mean an idea lacks value, that combining existing technologies in new ways can spark revolutions, and that one person's courage to challenge the system can change the world. The P-51 Mustang, designed in only 120 days, initially rejected by procurement officials, and saved by one mechanic's unauthorized test flight, went on to become America's most lethal fighter. It destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other U.S. fighter in World War II. It turned strategic bombing from a near-suicidal effort into a viable and decisive campaign by giving bombers the long-range protection they had lacked. And it provided the air dominance that made D-Day possible and Germany's defeat inevitable. Don Blakesley, the pilot who had once demanded a fighter that could go all the way to Berlin and back, led the 4th Fighter Group through the war's final years in Mustangs. He personally achieved 15.5 confirmed victories, but his greater accomplishment was leading his group to over 580 enemy aircraft, destroyed the highest total of any unit in the 8th Air Force. In a post-war interview, Blakesley reflected on what the Mustang had meant. "We had courage, we had numbers, and we had industry," he said. "But we didn't have the tool to do the job until the Mustang arrived. Once we got it, everything changed. We went from barely surviving to owning the sky. The Mustang didn't just protect bombers, it hunted German fighters wherever they flew and destroyed them. It was the aircraft we needed, delivered just in time to make a difference." The transformation from a rejected prototype to a war-winning weapon took less than a year. From Harker's unauthorized flight in April 1943 to Mustang squadrons ruling the skies in the spring of 1944, only 12 months had passed. In that short time, one mechanic's unapproved idea became proven engineering. Official skepticism turned into enthusiastic production, and a dismissed aircraft became the deadliest fighter in America's arsenal. The story of the P-51 Mustang stands as a powerful example of how innovation often begins at the ground level with those who understand the machinery best. It demonstrates that questioning authority, when guided by knowledge and conviction, can lead to breakthroughs that benefit entire nations. And it proves that the right idea, realized at the right moment, can alter the course of history. Franz Weber, a German soldier who survived the flamethrower tank assault at Aachen, later described what it was like to face American fighters in the final months of the war. By early 1945, he wrote, "We all knew the war was lost, but the American Mustangs made it undeniable. They were everywhere, at every altitude, all the time. They attacked our airfields, strafed our convoys, and shot down the few aircraft we had left. The sky belonged entirely to them. When I saw the Mustangs overhead, I knew we were watching the end of the Luftwaffe. They were beautiful machines that showed us everything we had lost: technical skill, industrial power, and most of all, the ability to innovate faster than our enemies. Today, when a restored P-51 Mustang soars across the sky at an air show, its deep, rolling Merlin engine note and sleek design capture the imagination of everyone watching. But what the audience is really seeing is something greater than an aircraft. They are witnessing the legacy of Ronald Harker's unauthorized flight, the validation of one mechanic's daring idea, and the living proof that innovation often comes from those willing to defy convention. The P-51 Mustang was born out of desperation, dismissed by bureaucracy, and saved by a single act of defiance. It became the fighter that helped win the air war over Europe, achieving what experts once declared impossible, escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, while defeating every German fighter that tried to stand in its way. The mechanic who broke the rules was right. The bureaucrats who dismissed him were wrong. And history was rewritten by one unauthorized test flight that proved a timeless truth sometimes. Victory depends on the courage to challenge the system.